Hello and welcome to our very first ever Femdom Question of the Week. Super geeked about this because, well, I'm a Femdom. And this is something that, I just get so many questions. And sometimes, and I'm sure Miss Pearl will agree, there are a lot of questions we wish were asked that aren't asked nearly often enough. So, this is our platform to answer those questions, whether they've been asked properly or not, and start spreading the word from two women who do this thing like all the time. Like this is our lives. This is what we do. So I'm going to actually let Miss Pearl introduce herself first, and then I'll do the honors and we'll get right into the question.
Hey there, I'm Miss Pearl. I am a Canadian female dominant. My thing is lifestyle femdom. That means you can't book me in a dungeon to help you have a strict or disciplined or even nice time. But I have been blogging for 10 years and active in the BDSM community in Montreal, Vancouver, and online. I've also organized munches. I moderate several forums, and I write femdom stories that people find are very sexy. I've also taken up putting live streams on YouTube too, so I'm pretty much everywhere.
Yay! And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nookie. If you want to use an honorific, you can call me Miss Nookie, but Nookie is actually just fine with me. Nookie Notes on FetLife, and I am the founder of Dating Kinky. I am a woman, a dominant cuckoldress pimptress who is polyamorous and monoromantic. So I fit a lot into my in-chargeness and my kink. And I am also not for hire. I do not do pay for play. I don't have a problem with it, actually. I respect the people who do. I've thought about it, and it does not make my lady boner go boom. That's all it is for me. For me, it's the connection is what really gets my dominance going, and I'm excited to be talking a little bit more about femdom and sharing this with those who are curious. So let's get right into our very first question. Femdom, FLR, women in charge, FinDomme, Dominatrix. What are the differences in all of these words, if any?
Well, this one's quite the doozy. It shows up on many forums and groups, and a lot of the problems with definitions is that it's a living language. You can try to be, and they say in language you can either be descriptivist or prescriptivist. Prescriptivist means there's only one definition for something, and it has to be that. Descriptivist in language means whatever people are using, as long as other people understand you, that's cool. And I usually take a descriptivist tactic to it, but if you want other people to understand you, there are general trends. Femdom tends to be the overarching term that's an umbrella on pretty much everything that Nookie just ran through as titles. That means any person who believes they're dominant and believes that they are close enough to the orbit of a female identity, whether they're a non-binary woman, whether they're a cisgendered woman, whether they're femme, whatever their particular cluster, or in some cases that they like some of the tropes and fetish behaviors that tend to be more associated with femdom. It's theoretically possible that you could be a male dom who's more into doing stuff that's typically done by femdoms than typically done by male doms. Now, when you're going to break down that huge string of terms, like I said, some of it's incredibly subjective. Usually, for example, when you have the term dominatrix, dominatrix is just a fancy way of saying that the person is female. For example, you've probably heard fancy ways of saying things like aviatrix, pastoratrix. It's not commonly used in the language, but kinky people are nerds and they're often very campy. The term dominatrix has been used somewhat tongue-in-cheek fairly far back. If you check out the Wikipedia, it'll tell you that This is a term that's basically medieval because people have been into the idea of a woman having power over them since pretty much as long as we've known people have been able to have sex. In this particular context, however, most of the time when someone says they're a dominatrix, they mean professional. But sometimes it's the vocabulary term they pick because they mean, well, you'll understand that I'm dominant, but in the kinky fun sense. So most women who are lifestyle doms do not identify as dominatrix, but you will find people use it to mean the stereotypes of a professional dom or the archetypes that you would think of the leather-clad mistress. About the only one that you could completely technically remove from Femdom is FinDomme. That's not gendered, although it's largely practiced by women over men, but FinDomme is short for financial domination. That one has a huge argument going around it. As far as kinks go, it's the new kid on the block as far as direct focus. It's always been something people have done. Basically, as long as you've been able to have money, currency, or the ability to give people things, people have been able to fetishize it. A lot of people will tell you, oh, well, in the old days, FinDom used to mean when we're just controlling the person's finances. No, the FinDom you see today, that's just FINDOM, people did not use that slang term 10 years ago to mean a budget dom. It's a popular thing to do. I personally think that as long as you're doing it safely, fill your boots. Some people get upset about it because it's new. Some people get upset about it because some of the marketing copy for it is terrible. And the extra piece of confusion where a lot of people get screwed up is that there's a bit of a blurriness between professional domination and domination for pay and FinDom, partially because the thing that you might be fetishizing when you pay for your dominant services, if you're buying it as a thing, might be that the act of paying is sexy for you. And this means that when people talk about it again, it gets super confusing. Furthermore, many professional dominants will also offer FinDom as part of it, like because they enjoy it. And before I put this all into the angle of, well, we're just doing this to please the males, the subs, a lot of women find this super empowering. And I mean, literally, it's a lady boner generator because money is power. And like it or not, we live in a society where the easiest way to get a coffee made exactly the way I want it is to give money to Starbucks, and someone who's studied it scientifically will be like, here you go, and I put rose sprinkles on it. Now, there's a whole bunch of other terms there, so we could probably do a whole episode. Nookie, do you want to tackle FLR?
So FLR, female-led relationships. In essence, this can be anything where, and to be clear, I threw women in charge in there because I actually like to use the idea of women in charge more than I like to use female-led relationships because of the gender versus biology. I've found that a lot of people really don't like the idea of female-led relationships because it focuses so much on, you know, the sex characteristics or the genitalia versus the feeling of a woman being in charge. But either one of them is really just the woman taking the lead in the relationship, whatever that looks like. That could be a marriage. It could be dating. It could even be, you know, on weekends, you're my part-time bitch type of thing. It doesn't really have to be anything specific. And also, to be clear, although I'm kinky as fuck, it doesn't have to be kinky. It could simply be a matriarchy, which has been around for a very long time. And you've probably seen that even in your own family tree. So yeah, it's a generic term that really focuses more on leading within some sort of relationship versus like a payment processing system or scening, like, you know, whereas, you know, that could be topping even more than necessarily domination. So there's a lot of permutations in there.
Yeah, Nookie, if someone said that they wanted a female-led relationship or an FLR, what would you think they'd mean compared to if they said they wanted a femdom relationship? Would you say it would be about the same thing, or they'd be specific things they were probably looking for?
I personally have slightly different connotations to those when someone says femdom to me, I usually feel that they're coming specifically from the kink angle. And then it includes like kind of the FLR stuff, especially if they say femdom relationship. But if they say FLR, I have a tendency to dig a little deeper, because to me, that could go from something like I said, a matriarchy or devotional sex type of relationship, or a knight and his queen type of relationship, and doesn't necessarily have the connotations of kink, or even like, you know, the uber dominatrix, whereas femdom can be everything from that to super, you know, latex clad, wick cracking, you're my, you know, slave as soon as I walk in the door type of stuff. So there's, regardless of what somebody uses, I always suggest having those conversations rather than leaving it at a single word and saying, oh, you want femdom, so do I, let's do this thing.
Yeah, I might give your editor a broke. I need to cough, which you will probably edit out of the final draft. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I inhaled a bit of dust. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a really good and rigorous definition of it. How many other things were in that list to define? Is there anything in particular you think we need to make sure we do go over?
No, I think it's touching on various concepts like domina, goddess, my queen. You know, all of these have often slightly different variations in thought processes and in what people are looking for. I also think it's critically important to approach a dominant woman or any woman and learn how she identifies herself first. Some people will be very touchy if you call them a dominatrix, for example, and they don't identify that way. I, for one, don't like to be called really any of those things. I like to be called by my name. Hello, Miss Nookie or Nookie. When people approach me and say, hello, goddess, I'm like, bye-bye. I really don't appreciate that. So I think that's important. But I think the most fascinating thing was something that I had no plan to touch on in this, but you brought it up, and I think it's definitely worth touching on. And that is the idea that money is power, and how we get our power in relationships. So I'd like to touch on the money is power thing, and then I'd like to talk a little bit, just a little bit, because we can do an entire episode on power, but just a little bit on the different types of power we have in relationships. So money is power. One of the things that I had talked to somebody some time ago, and they were trying to get me to, I don't know, do something for them. I don't remember what it was. And eventually they got so frustrated with my, you know, no, thank you, I have no interest or whatever, that they then offered money. And I said, you know, that interests me even less than you just being you as a human. But it reminded me that oftentimes when people, and this is not just men, but when people feel powerless on one hand, they often search for power in another way. And sometimes that power in the form of money, people hiring a pro or financial domination, to me, replaces in some small or large measure the need to be engaging or to be interesting or to do the courtship that you might otherwise have to take in order to get the same actions from somebody you don't pay. And I think that's interesting.
I think, sorry to interrupt there, I have a riff on that I found helps reconcile people like you and me who are, shall we say, a bit cash shy when it comes to our love and sex lives, and people who find this incredibly fulfilling, which is to take this way out of the context of kink and to look at human behavior holistically. And if you're watching this, you may or may not have heard of the term love languages. And if you look at love languages, two of them are acts of service and giving things. And one of the reasons why you see this dynamic of paying, yes, it allows you to skip a lot of the steps. And that's what I say with a pro dom. A lot of what she's offering is she's sorting through a lot of the confusion, the chaos, the not knowing if you message this woman, if she's going to be like, what the fuck did you just ask me to do? But on the other hand, for guys who like giving, this can be a really reciprocal part of how they want to express themselves. And this can be a huge disconnect, because one thing I've noticed is that for women who like to feel power in their relationships and feel power from receiving, you can get into the other direction of them being like, well, of course you're going to pay me. I actually get warm and fuzzies, or I get horny from this. And the guy being like, how dare you? It's not genuine or real if you do that. So that
yeah, sure.
What you said earlier about the differences in what people call themselves, whether they're goddess or mistress, you're going to have to talk about the person, and you're going to have to know what the why is. For me, I can do people giving things to me in a Femdom context, but I have to feel really close and safe with them before I'll tolerate it. Like the means to which my poor property had to take to be able to be allowed to give me presents to any degree, that took for me like a deep breath. Okay, there we go. But on the other hand, I also write books and I sell them, and I'm looking at my author sales and I'm going, they love me, they really like my writing, this is amazing. So your mileage may vary, and I think that's very important to keep in mind. But like Nookie said, there's a lot of us who we don't see any problem with anyone else receiving payment. But for us emotionally, particularly in the context of getting to know someone, it's basically a dial tone if you open with that.
So one of my love languages is gifts, which puts me seemingly at odds with the idea of payment. However, the thing about gifts for me is not so much, the financial power involved in them. It's the power over their thoughts. The idea that when I was not with them, they were thinking of me. And they think of me enough and with such good clarity that they pick the right gift. Yeah. And then I know they were thinking of me when I'm not with them, and I have something that reminds me to think of them when they're not with me. So even within those love languages, or even within financial domination, there would be different ways and reasons for doing those things that matter.
You can even find doms where it's the inverse. Their fantasy and their happy place is giving to the sub, and it might be nurturing, and it might be like a mommy dom who's playing out things like that. Or in my experience, one of the things I do to my property is periodically I will find a sex toy I like. I will go online, buy it, and get it shipped to his house for him to use. And this makes me feel very powerful, because I know he's going to be excited to get it, and I know he's going to use it, and I'm making the choices here. And he also really likes it, because one of the things that I find male subs in particular can get hung up on is they're always worrying, does she actually like this? Am I a burden to her? Does she find any of this sexy? Because they exist in a culture which male subs get told constantly, you're not hot, you're not sexy. Half the marketing copy for pros is telling them no one will ever want to touch you, because a sufficient number of guys find that hot, that it's a worthwhile thing to do. And also because for the doms, it often pleases them to be able to reject safely. So yeah, this sort of giving can be a big part of your dynamic in the other direction. Pretty much any love language can be done in any direction by any particular orientation of the DS spectrum. So don't feel you can't do that, or it's not dominant, or it's not submissive. It's between you and whomever you have the relationship with to decide what is or isn't dominant or submissive, and only the pair of you can determine what makes each other happy.
So to me, the upshot of that is the idea that whatever word or phrase is chosen, that's also something that needs to be discussed and negotiated between you and whoever you happen to be engaging with, to make sure that you both are on the same page, using the same language in the same way for the same reasons.
That's so important. That's why whether it's Femdom or any other part of BDSM, they'll tell you communicate, communicate, communicate. I think we may have nailed our first question down pretty firmly and got a pretty good digression that flowed back into it. Do you want to try tackling question number 2 and bring that one up?
We'll bring that up absolutely after a break.